Before we go in more depth in working on look dev or texturing or lighting or any other process that requires rendering or look dev, I would like to take you through the Katana template that ships with Seneferu in depth and to explain more about Katana's task control so you can understand when we start working on validating assets or look dev or any other task where we are going to use Katana intensively. First, let's have a look at the nodes that you will find in this template. The first thing you will see is the assembly node. This is a node that when the production manager wants to ingest or feed some Seneferu assets into the Katana template, he will look for this node. If this node was not found, which is a node, which is a merge node called assembly, if he didn't find one, he will create one related to the task that is being loaded. For example, if you are loading dependencies for lighting recipe, for lighting task, if Seneferu didn't find such node, then a lighting merge node will be created and all the dependencies for the lighting will be fed into that merge node. Additional brew nodes is just a node that you can use it to add any nodes that you want to prune, and this is the primitive properties node that it will set some useful information regarding to subdiv and will copy some attributes, will make some compatibility between Alembic and Pixar USD, so you can mix using the two in the same pipeline or switch between them without having any issues. In addition, it's also here there is a node that converts any color RGBA color to per vertex color on the polygons. It converts them to 3 float colors because the 4 colors are not supported as primitive variables, but some applications, basically Maya, will output 4 colors, especially when you output paint effects. You will not have an option to write the colors as RGB, and that will not be supported, at least in RenderMan. This instances detector will detect any objects that you have duplicated in Maya using instances, because NRABC export, which is the Alembic cache exporter for Maya that comes with Seneferu, is going to write the information about anything you instance inside Maya using duplicate instances or by particle instancers into the Alembic cache. Then this information will be read in this node and will create Katana instances array, which should make the traversal of these instances efficient, especially when the count of the instances is really high. Here is the shader library that also ships with Seneferu, that has almost most of the shaders that you might need, including Pyro shader, including Skin shader, and most of the things that you may need in production. You will find it here, coming within this shader library. And of course, as you saw before, how can you build your own shaders that works compatible with Seneferu. When you come through the nodes here, you will see variants. Seneferu has database level variants. If you want to override the variants, you can have one of 10 nodes here, or you can just duplicate nodes as you want and make any variants overrides as you would like to. Also, the Seneferu variants will be covered in more details later, so just let it go now until we come to it in a later session. So here is the look resolve group. In this group we are detecting the material tags that you made through the look dev or texturing, and we assign the shaders from the shader library to all the assets that were fed in here. And in addition to that, the textures will also be resolved in render time. So whatever, any asset that was published through Seneferu will be fed in here, will automatically get shaded and textures during this node. The displacement bound is just to set the displacement bound, and here is material overrides. This is where you can override anything that was automatically assigned here, and you can override per object variations, and for example the vari ID must, or some of the shaders that is shipped with Seneferu is using primitive variable that called vari ID. We use it to variate things like duplicated assets or instances, that you can use it in the shading network as you want, and it's used in some of the provided shaders. We will see that in details later also. The variations override is actually variating the vari ID primitive variable to different values, and this is allowing you to override what was done randomly. For example, I don't want to go in deep detail about this, but sometimes when you duplicate or reuse the asset several times in the scene, what we are actually doing is that we set the vari ID to the instance count of your asset. So let's say that you have a horse asset and you are using this horse 12 times, then you have horse 1, 2, 3, 4 to 10 to 12. Then each one of them will have vari ID called 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 and so on until 0.12. According to this, each one of them will have different shader and look. If you want to override or to modify one of them, you will be able to override the vari ID here. Then this is a texture override version where you can switch between different, this is the texture dire. If you override the directory of the textures, then the directory you will write here any texture that you will put in this folder. It will automatically gets assigned to the objects that is being rendered, depending on the name of the object and the name of the texture, because actually this is the concept of how Seneferu works. During the texture assignment, the textures are published in one in the location of the texture of the asset, and depending on which asset is being rendered, Seneferu goes to that directory and look up the folder and automatically assign the shaders in the textures in render time based on the textures that he found in the texture folder of that asset. So you can override this texture folder here, especially when you want to work on look dev or customizing some textures before you publish them, or when you want to, for example, override the texture directory when you are painting some textures and testing them also before publishing them. And here is something that we missed, that in this node can be used to switch between different texture versions. Let's say that you have published 3 texture versions of an asset, then you can switch between these different versions here using this number. You can switch between these versions and see how each one of them is going to look like in render. Apply lens distortion. Actually, Seneferu comes with a camera lens distortion plugin for RenderMan and Arnold called Nothing Real TDE Lens, or NRTDE Lens. NRTDE Lens is a plugin for RenderMan and Arnold that is used to take the lens distortion information from a 3D equalizer tracking solution and apply it to the render camera in render time. In this case, your rendered images will have the same exact distortion that matches the shot plate distortion applied because of the real camera lens. Displacement overrides is just to override the displacement. Here to switch between different render integrators. This is just a node where you can put any objects that you don't want them to cast shadows. This is to switch between motion blur and static. The reason why we have also here NR hair, because Seneferu is shipping also with Nothing Real Hair render procedural, which is a render procedural for hair that takes limbic caches for the simulated guide curves and creates the hair in render time. And by the way, when you load hair in this case, you can tweak the hair properties in render time rather than tweaking them in an application, because actually the hair is generated in render time rather than being generated in your 3D application like Maya, for example. So here the motion blur switch here will also apply the motion blur parameters to NR hair. This is, of course, the light, the gaffer, and here the holdout objects node. If you have any holdout objects, you can just put them in here just to make your life easy later rather than doing everything. I'm assuming here in this template that some users might be artists and they don't want to go through any technical details or to go through scripting or development or anything like that. So the main purpose of this Katana template is to make your life easy, and we understand that most of the users who want to use Katana are actually artists, and they might not feel comfortable with writing expressions or writing scripts or doing complex or technical things. So the purpose of this Katana template, that as you will see later, it will make your life very easy. You will just click on load dependencies in the production manager. You will find everything working as expected. You will do nothing but moving lights and doing final render when you are fine. It's almost as easy as that for most of the things that you are going to do, because actually, as you can see, the Katana template is actually going to do everything you may be expecting to do during your session. The maximum thing that you may need to do is to just, as we mentioned, override shaders, override textures, or maybe do some light linking, stuff like that. That, of course, this will not be automated in the template itself. And here, this is considered to be the setups for your render pass. All the AOVs, support to crypto matte, support to shadow filters to see shadows in maybe to merge shadows with alpha for previewing VFX things when you want to render 3D assets on a back plate, live plate. So a lot of things are happening here. This is creating the directory where the renders will go in case if you have not this created, and this defines all the AOVs and passes you want to render, and this is for previewing inside Katana for a live session because you don't need everything here when you are doing live renders to test your recipe and your assets. So that's it for the Katana template. I will open one of the lighting recipe to explain more about Seneferu's task control here. Let me go to one of the scene. This is one of the shots that we will do later together. I will check it out. First of all, notice what happened when I clicked on the checkout button. When I clicked on the checkout button, the Seneferu Production Manager communicated with the task control to open the recipe that the production manager sent through the task control. Because actually the concept of the task control that it's listening to external Python commands through an open port for that, so it can receive commands like it's updating you with any new notes comes to your task, any notes that about something that affects your work, or any task that or asset that was updated inside your recipe, so you can maybe flush the cache to get the latest approved version of a particular asset according to that node. It can receive a command to refresh a live group node when the team collaboration, or I mean team working together on the same recipe, or and so on. And in addition, of course, to all the commands that comes from the production manager during the load dependencies and checkout, and a lot of other features as we will see in later sessions. As you can see here, you are seeing the brief of your task. This is the information of the task that you are running. And here are any notes that you have received either automatically by Seneferu or by your supervisor or the client or whatever. And as you can see, it's the same template. All the assets that are members of the shots are fed to the assembly node as we mentioned before. And here are some useful features that you can use. For example, if I selected this node and I click on show depth versions, this is going to show me all the shaders or the members of this shader library. It's showing me the version of each shader used to build this shader library. What you see here at the beginning is the actual node here, because actually what the button is doing is that it dives through the graph until the node that you selected and checks what are all the assets that were connected up to this point, and will show you the versions of them and a lot of information about them. In this case, because I selected, or I'm querying the construction history of this node, then I'm getting, this is the node version 18, the local version, which is the version I'm using, the current version, which is the approved version on the system, the latest system that there might be other versions that were published, but are not approved and are not the version that I'm using. Obviously, this can be used so you can know if you are using the latest approved version, or if you are running or using outdated object, and so on. These will be automatically managed, and Seneferu will always keeps your recipes updated with the approved version automatically. But just in case if you want to troubleshoot something or you want to debug an issue or something. And also it will tell you the constructors or the construction history of the asset that you are using here. So this is obviously one asset, but it was built on all these children assets or members. The same for any other asset. For example, this is the train animation. You can show the dependencies of the train animation. It will tell you which version of the animation is this, and it will give you also the dependencies information on how this were constructed, the rig version, the model version, and also which application it was made in. Because sometimes maybe the model is made in Modo, and the rig is made in Maya, the animation, and so on. Yeah, so the version of each one of the dependencies and that was used to create your asset, that in case if you want to reproduce the same thing or also to troubleshoot something. And here you have the get version button that you can use it. For example, if I selected a node and click on get version, will tell you that this is the camera animation version 2. And if I selected on, for example, let's say that this asset now it's version 3, I can set it to version 2. This makes the animation goes to version 2. If I query the animation version now of this asset, it will return, let it just because I opened everything. If I queried the version now, it's version 2. While if I clicked on the base version, this will tell me what was the actual version that I used when I built this version of the lighting recipe. So as you noticed, I checked out this lighting recipe, which is version 1, which is the same current and last version. I checked it out, and when I built this one and I published it, the assets that were used or the version of the animation that was used in the recipe was version 3. So the base version button is telling you what is the base version that you were using when you created this recipe and published this actual version. The reason why we have something like this, because whenever a new version of the animation is approved, this version that is used in your recipe will be updated automatically. So if on the other side somebody published animation version 4 and this was approved by the animation director, and it has been approved technically also and set to approved, I mean, then automatically your recipe will be using animation version 4. You will need to do nothing to get version 4 in your recipe. It will update your recipe automatically, and you will receive a notification actually that you need to revisit your scene or notice that you have an asset updated in your recipe. You will receive something like this, for example. See the note here. This was telling me that the Mountain View EcoSys, which is a major dependency of this task, has been also updated. Also means that there was something before it has been updated also. And so on. So these actually are coming automatically from Seneferu because Seneferu detects that and notify everybody got affected by any asset updates at anybody's else side. So in this case, you might want to know what was the actual version that you was using, just for troubleshooting or for or to check something, to compare something, or whatever the reason is. Then in that case you can click on query the base version, so you can know which exact version you used, and by setting the asset version, then this will become version 3 again. Now when you query the version, it's version 3. Like, for example, if I set it now to version 1, if you query the version, it becomes it's telling you that it's version 3. Then when I click on set version, this will set it again to version 3, as you can see here. But anyway, notice that Seneferu is configured the way that he will not allow you to publish the recipe when one of the assets is having a versioned asset, which is having a version number. It will always force you to use versionless. Use versionless will set the task to the approved version, which is a versionless file path that always point to the approved version of the asset. So that is the use versionless button is doing, which is setting back the asset to the versionless file path. So you will notice that all the assets are using the versionless file path, unless you of course configured one of the process to load the versioned files instead, in case if you don't want this automatic update to happen. Then you can configure, for example, the lighting process to always use versioned dependencies rather than using the versionless dependencies. And that's it for now. We will go in more details about Seneferu's variants and asset variants and look variants later when we come to this in later sessions.